The nights were always intoxicating. The air at Diddy's parties seemed to buzz with its own rhythm, pulsing with energy that could only exist in spaces drenched in excess, fame, and the kind of wealth that turned everything golden. Glittering chandeliers hung high, casting warm halos over rooms that stretched far beyond what felt natural. Everything about those nights seemed larger than life. The people, the music, the whispers that rippled through the crowd like secrets carried on velvet. It was here, amidst champagne bubbles and diamond smiles, that Ava Harper, a stunning young model and Diddy's undeniable favorite at the time, first glimpsed the things that would stay with her forever. Before we start, smash the like and subscribe buttons for more updates. Ava had always been drawn to the spotlight. She grew up dreaming of runways and magazine covers, the kind of life where her face would stare back at her from glossy pages and strangers would know her name. By her early 20s, she had it. She walked for the most prestigious designers, adorned ad campaigns that ran in every major city, and became a regular feature at the kind of parties people fought tooth and nail to enter. Diddy's were the pinnacle. They were the parties whispered about for days after, where anyone who was anyone would be found. Attending them was not just a privilege, it was a declaration that you had made it. At first, everything about those nights felt magical to Ava. She arrived on the arms of famous faces and in dresses that made the world stop and stare. Diddy had taken a quick liking to her, though she never understood if it was because of her beauty, her sharp wit, or her quiet ability to observe everything without intruding. He often placed her at the center of things, surrounding her with luminaries, musicians who had shaped entire generations, actors whose faces graced global billboards, and socialites who lived lives of unfiltered glamour. She moved through these circles effortlessly, her face frozen in an enigmatic smile, though her mind absorbed everything like a sponge. For months, the parties felt like dreams, bright, effervescent moments that blurred into one another. The music never stopped, the laughter never faded, and the people seemed to glow as if lit from within. But dreams often curdle when you wake up, and Ava would later look back at those nights and wonder how she ever missed the shadows lurking in the corners. It was during one particular party, one that would etch itself into her memory forever, that Ava saw the first crack in the glossy facade. It had been one of the grandest events yet. The mansion where the party was held sprawled across acres, with fountains that glimmered under moonlight, and marble floors that echoed with the sound of expensive shoes. Guests drifted through rooms that seemed to multiply, each one themed in a way that felt surreal. In one, a DJ spun beats that made the floor vibrate. In another, low luxurious couches were surrounded by golden hookahs and heavy drapes, making the air thick with smoke and whispered confessions. Everywhere Ava turned, there were faces she recognized. Rappers lounging with sunglasses on indoors. Women whose names were synonymous with glamour draped over men whose presence commanded rooms. It was the kind of party where time no longer felt linear. Ava wandered through it, champagne in hand, as people floated past her like specters, beautiful and elusive. She could feel eyes on her, as she always did at these parties, but that night something about them unsettled her. It was a different kind of watching, less admiration, more calculation. The thought prickled her skin, but she shrugged it off. This was a world where watching was normal, where every glance carried an expectation or a secret. Then she saw her. The girl was young, much younger than Ava, barely out of her teenage years by the looks of her. She was curled up on one of the oversized chairs in the farthest corner of a dimly lit room, her delicate frame draped in an extravagant gown that seemed far too large for her. Her face was a picture of sadness, her expression blank and distant, as if she had detached from everything around her. What struck Ava most were the smudges of mascara under her eyes and the faint trembling of her hands, barely visible as she clutched an untouched glass of champagne. Ava hesitated. Something about the girl felt wrong. She didn't belong there, not the way everyone else did. There was no laughter in her gaze, no sense of awe or delight in the glittering room. Before Ava could approach her, a man she vaguely recognized slid into the chair beside the girl. He leaned in close, too close, murmuring something that made the girl flinch. Her fingers tightened around the glass, but she didn't look up or protest. Ava stood frozen for a moment, unsure of whether to intervene. She knew the man's face. He was one of those untouchable figures, someone powerful enough to brush off consequences like lint. The moment stretched out longer than it should have, heavy and thick like a storm about to break. Then the man reached out and grabbed the girl's wrist, pulling her to her feet. She stumbled, the glass slipping from her fingers and shattering on the floor. A few people glanced over at the sound but looked away just as quickly, their expressions carefully blank. Ava's heart hammered as she watched the man drag the girl out of the room, his grip unrelenting. She wanted to follow, to do something, but her feet felt rooted to the floor. Around her, the party carried on as if nothing had happened, the music drowning out everything else. That was the first moment that Ava realized not everything at Diddy's parties glittered. It was the first time she saw beneath the golden surface and noticed the cracks that ran deep. But it wasn't the last. After that night, her perspective shifted. The lights didn't seem as bright, the laughter didn't sound as genuine, and the people, once gods in her eyes, began to look like mere mortals hiding behind masks. She started seeing things she had overlooked before, women being ushered through private doors by men with unreadable expressions, faces pale under their makeup. The way certain guests seemed to disappear for hours and return looking shaken, their smiles hollow. Whispers passed between people who looked over their shoulders before speaking. One evening, as Ava wandered into yet another palatial sitting room filled with bodies and smoke, she noticed a group of girls huddled near the corner. They were laughing, but there was something fragile about it, as if their mirth could shatter at any moment. Ava approached curious and struck up a conversation with one of them, a petite blonde who looked barely old enough to drink. The girl was friendly enough, though her eyes darted around the room nervously. When Ava asked if she was having fun, the girl gave her a look Ava would never forget. A look that was equal parts pleading and resigned, as if to say, "Don't ask questions you don't want answers to." It was then that Ava realized these parties were not the gilded paradises they appeared to be. They were something darker, something that left stains that couldn't be washed away. People talked about Diddy's events as if they were the stuff of dreams, but to Ava, they began to feel like nightmares in disguise. She started avoiding certain rooms, ones where the laughter felt too forced or where she caught glimpses of things she knew she shouldn't see. Her smile at these events grew tighter, her eyes sharper. The final straw came on a night when the party had reached a fever pitch. The music was deafening, the drinks flowing endlessly, and the mansion felt more alive than ever. Ava had retreated to a quieter corner of the garden to collect herself when she noticed a young woman stumbling out from a side entrance. Her dress was torn at the hem, her makeup smeared, and her expression one of pure panic. She was looking over her shoulder as if afraid someone would follow her. Ava watched as the girl darted down the driveway and disappeared into the night. She knew in that moment that she couldn't unsee what she had seen. The memories of those nights clung to Ava long after she stopped attending the parties. She never spoke of them, not to anyone, because the truth felt heavy, too heavy to share. But the images haunted her, the trembling hands, the distant eyes, the silent cries for help that no one dared acknowledge. She often wondered what became of the girls she saw, the ones who didn't belong there but somehow ended up lost in that world of wealth and illusion. Ava would always be grateful for the fame and success that her modeling career brought her, but she could never look at the industry or its parties the same way again. Beneath the glittering surfaces lay shadows that most people chose to ignore, and once you saw them, there was no going back. What she witnessed at Diddy's parties, those cracks in the veneer of perfection, would haunt her for life. They were reminders of how easy it was for darkness to hide behind golden doors, and how quickly innocence could be swallowed whole by a world that refused to see it. The parties would carry on, the music would play, and the lights would shine, but for Ava, the illusion was forever broken, and no matter how much time passed, she would always remember the things she saw and the faces that still haunted her dreams. Ava Harper never imagined that the nights that once felt like dreams would become the source of her deepest unease. After that final haunting evening when she saw the girl running into the night, Ava stopped attending Diddy's parties altogether. Her absence was noted. The calls came, first subtle invitations, then more insistent messages from people who wondered where she had disappeared to. She told everyone she was taking a step back or focusing on herself or whatever polite lie people wanted to hear. No one asked for details. In their world, everything was surface level, and nobody really wanted to see what lay beneath it. But Ava could see it. She had felt it. The smiles that hid too much, the laughter that echoed too hollowly, and the cold, dark truths lurking in the margins of those glittering nights, all of it lingered in her mind. It was the kind of unease that wasn't easily shaken. No matter how hard she tried to distract herself with work or friendships or travel, the memories clawed their way back to her, sharper than ever. At night, her dreams were no longer peaceful. Instead, they were flooded with the faces of girls who never spoke, but whose eyes screamed for help. Their silent pleas haunted her, each one accusing her of looking and walking away. For a while, Ava tried to convince herself she was overreacting. After all, no one else seemed to think there was anything unusual about those parties. People continued to speak about them in glowing terms, as though they were magical experiences reserved for the elite few. It was easy to believe she was the only one who had noticed something was wrong. Had she imagined it? But the gnawing dread in her gut told her otherwise. The more she thought about it, the more certain she became that what she had seen was real, and far worse than she initially wanted to believe. One afternoon, several months after her last appearance at one of Diddy's infamous parties, Ava was having lunch with a fellow model, Natalia. The two of them had known each other for years, though their friendship had always been superficial. That day, however, Natalia seemed different. She was quieter, less preoccupied with gossip or social media, and her normally flawless makeup did little to hide the exhaustion written across her face. "You okay?" Ava asked, stirring her coffee absent-mindedly. Natalia hesitated, looking around the cafe as though making sure no one could hear them. "Do you ever think about those parties?" she finally asked. Her voice was soft but heavy, as though the words cost her something. Ava froze, her heart skipping a beat. It was the first time anyone had ever brought it up. For so long she had been trapped in her own head, unsure whether she was the only one who felt this way. She set her spoon down carefully, her gaze steady. "What do you mean?" Natalia bit her lip, her perfectly manicured nails tapping nervously against the table. "The last time I went, I saw something." Her voice trailed off and she looked down, her hands trembling slightly. Ava felt a chill run through her. "What did you see?" The look Natalia gave her was one of pure, unfiltered fear. "I don't think I can say, but it wasn't right. You know what I mean, don't you?" Ava nodded slowly. For months, she had thought she was alone, but Natalia's words confirmed what Ava had been afraid to admit to herself. There was something dark about those parties, something unspoken, hidden just beneath the surface. Whatever Natalia had seen must have been bad enough to haunt her too. Ava wanted to press for details, but the fear in Natalia's eyes told her not to. It was a silent understanding between them. They both knew something had been wrong, but to speak it aloud was dangerous. After that conversation, Ava's unease deepened. If Natalia had seen something, how many others had noticed but chosen to stay silent? How many people were walking around with the same ghosts that Ava carried? She began to feel as though the world was playing a sick trick on her. Everywhere she turned, she saw flashes of those nights. A photo of someone she recognized from the parties, a song that reminded her of those golden rooms, or the smell of expensive perfume that sent her spiraling back to those moments she couldn't forget. Her anxiety grew worse. She found herself jumping at shadows, flinching at unexpected noises. The glamour that had once surrounded her life felt like a thin veil that had been ripped away, leaving her exposed to the rot underneath. She tried to focus on her career, but even modeling, the thing she had once loved, felt hollow now. She couldn't shake the feeling that she had seen something she wasn't meant to see, and the more she thought about it, the more afraid she became. Ava wasn't stupid. She knew that powerful people were untouchable. She had heard enough stories over the years to know that secrets in their world were carefully guarded, and anyone who dared to expose them paid a price. The industry she worked in, for all its beauty and allure, was built on a foundation of whispers, manipulation, and unspoken agreements. She had been naive to think she could move through it without being touched by its darkness. But the memories wouldn't leave her alone. One night, unable to sleep, Ava sat on her balcony overlooking the city skyline. The air was cool and silent, a stark contrast to the noise that filled her mind. She thought about the girl she had seen on that final night, the one who had stumbled into the dark, looking so small and scared. Where had she gone? Was she okay? The questions twisted in her stomach like knives. Ava wondered how many other girls there had been, how many faces she had missed while she was busy pretending the parties were magical. Guilt crept into her thoughts, suffocating and inescapable. She had seen it. She had known something was wrong, but she had done nothing. She hadn't intervened, hadn't spoken up, hadn't tried to stop it. How could she? She was just a model, a pretty face in a world that treated women like accessories, valuable, but ultimately disposable. The people who hosted those parties were too powerful, too untouchable. What could she have done? That was what she told herself, but deep down, she knew it was just an excuse. She had been afraid of losing her place in the industry, afraid of angering the wrong people, afraid of becoming a target. And yet the more she thought about it, the more she realized she couldn't keep living like this. The guilt was eating her alive, and the memories refused to fade. She couldn't unsee what she had seen. She couldn't pretend those girls didn't matter. Ava started doing research, quietly, carefully. She combed through articles, interviews, and forums, looking for any signs that others had noticed what she had. At first, she found nothing. The parties were still spoken about in glowing terms, as though they were the epitome of luxury and fun. But if you dug deep enough, there were whispers, anonymous stories on obscure forums, comments left on old social media posts, brief mentions of people who had disappeared from the scene. Nothing concrete, but enough to confirm that Ava wasn't alone in what she had seen. The deeper she dug, the more uneasy she became. There was a pattern, one that people didn't want to see. Girls who had once been regulars at those parties quietly faded away, their careers stalling or their names disappearing from the spotlight. Whispers about drug use, exploitation, and manipulation began to surface in corners of the internet where few dared to look. Ava felt sick to her stomach as the pieces fell into place. Her fear grew as the truth became clearer. If she had been scared before, now she was petrified. The world she had been a part of was darker and more dangerous than she had ever realized. She began to feel like someone was watching her, as though her digging had stirred up attention she didn't want. Small things started to happen that set her on edge. Her apartment was broken into, though nothing was stolen. She received anonymous calls at odd hours, the voice on the other end silent. Her agent told her to keep her head down and focus on work, though Ava could tell there was something he wasn't saying. One night, as Ava left a photo shoot, she noticed a black car parked across the street. It wasn't unusual. Cars were always coming and going in her line of work, but something about this one felt off. She walked quickly, keeping her head down, but as she turned the corner, she felt a prickle of awareness on the back of her neck. Someone was following her. Her heart pounded as she picked up her pace, ducking into a nearby convenience store to catch her breath. When she looked back outside, the car was gone. That was the moment Ava realized she couldn't stay silent anymore. Whatever darkness lurked at those parties, whatever secrets were being hidden, it was bigger than her, and it wasn't going to disappear just because she wanted to forget it. She thought about the girl with the trembling hands, the blonde who had given her that look of resigned fear, the whispers she had read online. How many people had been hurt? How many others were too afraid to speak? Ava knew the risks of speaking out. She knew it could ruin her career, make her a target, or worse. But she also knew she couldn't live with herself if she stayed quiet. She had spent months haunted by the things she had seen, and she realized that the only way to escape them was to shine a light on the darkness. With shaking hands, Ava began writing down everything she remembered. Every detail, every face, every room where something had felt wrong. She reached out to the girls she had once seen at the parties, cautiously and quietly, to see if any of them would talk to her. At first, most of them refused. They were scared, just like Ava had been, but eventually, a few of them started to open up. Their stories were worse than Ava had imagined, tales of manipulation, coercion, and silence. Ava listened to them, her stomach twisting with anger and grief. The decision to speak publicly didn't come easily. Ava knew that once she opened that door, there would be no going back. But she also knew that staying silent was no longer an option. Too many people had suffered. Too many voices had been silenced, and she refused to let the cycle continue. The night before her story was set to break, Ava sat in her apartment, staring out at the city lights. She felt a strange mix of fear and resolve. She didn't know what would happen next. if people would believe her, if they would turn on her, or if she would disappear like so many others had. But for the first time in months, the ghosts that haunted her felt quiet. Ava Harper had seen things she was never meant to see, and now the world was going to see them too. Ava Harper awoke the next morning with an unsettling mix of clarity and dread. The sun streamed through her window as if the world outside was bright and unbothered, but Ava's chest was heavy with the weight of what she was about to do. Her decision to speak out, carefully planned and deliberate, felt like walking onto a stage where every spotlight in the world would converge. Her voice would be heard, but so too would the consequences echo through every corner of her life. Ava wasn't naive. The people she was about to implicate were far more powerful than anyone could comprehend. She spent the morning reviewing the final draft of her statement. Every word had been chosen with precision, factual, steady, devoid of emotion, yet impossible to ignore. The moments she recounted were burned into her mind like scars, and her words carried the weight of months of sleepless nights, whispers, and silent guilt. She didn't name names directly yet, but she painted a picture vivid enough for anyone who had been part of that world to recognize it instantly. The lavish parties, the golden rooms that felt too perfect, the shadows that trailed behind them, the silent faces of girls who didn't belong. It wasn't long before the statement hit the press. Ava had chosen her outlet carefully, an investigative journalist she trusted to handle her words with care. Within hours, her story was live, spreading across the internet like wildfire. Her phone began buzzing relentlessly. Calls, texts, notifications she didn't dare read. She turned the device off, placing it face down on her kitchen table, and sat in silence. The world was waking up to the truth she had carried alone for far too long. The backlash, as Ava anticipated, was swift and brutal. Some people hailed her bravery. Friends she hadn't heard from in years sent messages of support. Strangers praised her online for finally breaking the silence. But others were quick to turn on her, labeling her as a liar, an opportunist, someone desperate for attention or revenge. Gossip forums and tabloids tore her apart, picking at every aspect of her life, her career, and her credibility. Old photos of her at the very parties she had condemned resurfaced with scathing captions, asking how someone who had enjoyed the luxury could now play the victim. "She's only speaking out because she fell out of favor," one comment read. "If it was so bad, why didn't she leave sooner?" another scoffed. The criticisms were as sharp as knives, but Ava reminded herself that this was how the world worked. People loved the illusion too much to let it crumble without a fight. She was exposing something they didn't want to see. Ava stayed inside for days, barely daring to leave her apartment. The anxiety that clawed at her grew worse with each passing hour. Friends stopped by occasionally, urging her to eat, to sleep, to ignore the noise. "You did the right thing," they told her, but their voices always wavered with unease, as if they too feared what would happen next. She was no longer just Ava Harper, the model. She was Ava Harper, the whistleblower, the troublemaker, the woman who had dared to challenge an untouchable world. And then came the threats. At first they were subtle. Anonymous emails warning her to be careful, cryptic messages left in her DMs that she tried to dismiss as trolls, but they escalated quickly. A note was slipped under her apartment door one evening. Ava found it as she returned from a brief trip to the grocery store. The paper was plain, the handwriting sharp and slanted. "People like you don't last long. Stop talking." Ava's breath hitched as she clutched the note, her pulse pounding in her ears. She checked the locks on her door 3 times that night, every creak of the floorboards making her jump. Her paranoia grew until it became a constant hum in the back of her mind. She began looking over her shoulder every time she walked outside, memorizing license plates of cars parked near her building. Her home, once her sanctuary, felt like a prison, and every shadow that fell across her window made her skin crawl. One night, as Ava tried to sleep, she heard a noise outside her window. Her apartment was on the 3rd floor, and the sound, like faint scratching, made no sense. She sat up in bed, her heart racing as the noise persisted. Summoning all the courage she could, she crept to the window and peeked through the blinds. There was nothing there. No movement, no sign of anyone. But when she turned back, she found a single rose lying on her windowsill. A fresh rose, perfectly cut. Ava backed away, her breath coming in short gasps. It was a message. She was sure of it. Someone had been there. Someone wanted her to know they could get close. Ava called the police, but the officer who arrived later that night didn't seem to take her concerns seriously. "Are you sure it wasn't just a prank?" he asked, scribbling lazily in his notebook. Ava wanted to scream. How could they not see what was happening? How could they not understand that this wasn't a joke? She knew who she was up against, even if she couldn't say the names aloud. These were people who operated in the shadows, people whose reach extended far beyond what most could comprehend. Despite the fear, Ava refused to back down. The truth, she reminded herself, was more important than her comfort, more important than her career. She knew the risks of staying silent were greater than the ones she faced by speaking out. Slowly, other voices began to join hers. Encouraged by her bravery, a few women started sharing their own experiences. Some came forward anonymously, afraid of retaliation, but their stories painted a damning picture. They spoke of being pressured, manipulated, and silenced at the very same parties Ava had described. Their words added weight to Ava's story, and for the first time, the tides began to shift. The media couldn't ignore the growing chorus of voices. Headlines began to change. What had once been dismissed as a bitter model's claims turned into serious investigations. Reporters began asking questions, and some of the powerful men Ava had feared for so long were finally being scrutinized. It wasn't much, yet, but it was a start. Ava felt a flicker of hope for the first time in months. But hope was a fragile thing. One afternoon, Ava received a call from an unknown number. Against her better judgment, she answered it, her voice shaking slightly as she said, "Hello?" There was silence on the other end for a moment, and then a low voice spoke. "You need to stop, for your own good." The call disconnected before Ava could respond, leaving her frozen in place, her phone clutched tightly in her hand. The message was clear. They were watching her. They knew where she was, what she was doing, and they wanted her to stop. Ava sank onto her couch, tears streaming down her face as the weight of everything she had done crashed over her. She had tried to be strong, tried to do the right thing, but now it felt like the walls were closing in on her. In the days that followed, Ava began to withdraw again. The fear was relentless, creeping into every moment of her life. Friends urged her to leave the city, to lay low for a while, but Ava couldn't bring herself to run. If she left now, they would win. All the girls she had seen, all the stories she had heard, they deserved justice. They deserved someone who wouldn't back down. Ava spent her days carefully documenting everything she knew, handing over information to trusted journalists who had begun their own investigations. She met with lawyers, spoke with advocates, and found solace in the small community of people who believed her. Though the world outside still felt hostile, she was no longer alone. Months later, Ava received an email from one of the women she had spoken to, a girl whose story had mirrored the ones Ava had seen unfold at those parties. The message was simple. "Thank you. I thought no one would ever believe me." Ava sat staring at the screen for a long time, tears streaming down her face. It was a small victory, but it was enough to remind her why she had done this. The world may never fully understand what she had seen, and the powerful men who ran those parties may never face all the consequences they deserved. But Ava knew she had done something that mattered. She had given a voice to those who had been silenced, brought light to shadows that had lingered far too long, and reminded the world that the glittering surfaces they admired were often hiding something much darker. Ava's life would never return to what it had been before, but she had made her peace with that. She had chosen the truth, and even though it had cost her everything, it was a price she was willing to pay. The memories of those nights would haunt her forever, but they no longer controlled her. Instead, they served as a reminder. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do is to refuse to look away. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to our channel. Also, leave your comments below and tell us. What are your thoughts on what Diddy's favorite models saw at his parties? We want to hear from you. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.